This.
All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Professor Adonay, and I'm excited to be here with you today for part two of our Dia de Muertos class. This one's I so affectionately called Ofrendas, Graveyards, and Coco, because if you haven't seen Coco, you're going to want to, especially by the end of this. So what I want to start with is going to be a bit of a recap of the last class, which was part one, the pre-Hispanic origins of Dia de Muertos. We're not going to get too much into it because, that was its own class, but this is just for in case anybody was not able to join us last time, but is here today. And then also just a reminder, please keep everything on mute. And I use they, them pronouns in English, ella in Spanish. And let's get started. So once again, the origins of what we now would call Dia de Muertos can be traced back over 3,000 years, right? The aspects of the modern holiday, we can see parts of it in the days of the Olmecs, the Toltecs. We could see them during the time of the Maya Empire and the Mexica Empire. One thing there to note on just some terminology before we go much further. If you are familiar with a group called the Aztecs, right? The Aztecs, or in Spanish, the Aztecas. Aztec was not a name that they would refer to themselves by. Aztec was a name given to them by later European anthropologists and is not what they would have ever considered themselves. So in that regard, they would refer to themselves as a unit as the Mexica, right? So that's Mexica or Mexika, depending on your spelling. If they were to refer to themselves as an individual, they would refer to themselves as Mexicat. And don't worry about being late, you're good. If you're here last time, we are just recapping some things. They would refer to themselves as Mexicat. And then that would be the same as saying I'm an American, I'm Californian, I'm a Coloradan, that sort of thing. So that's it's one thing we want to make sure we know. And then the other thing here, as you could see, the title of this class is Dia de Muertos, right? Dia de Muertos. This is not Dia de los Muertos. There's a funny thing that kind of happened there. And so just letting some folks in. Bam. All right. So a funny thing that happened there was so Dia de Muertos wasn't this unanimous, all-encompassing Mexican holiday from the beginning, right? It was originally a predominantly central and southern Mexican thing. Very, very popular in states of like Oaxaca, Veracruz, and then but was never it wasn't something like the whole country celebrated in tandem all the time, always, right? Simply because of the peoples that it came from. Bam, 2 seconds, y'all. My apologies. A few more, y'all just got here. All right. Sorry about that. But it was always historically referred to as Dia de Muertos, Day of the Dead. Dead meaning of the, right? Day of the Dead. In the 60s and 70s, there became a push normalize it and or have it become more general, more nationwide. And then a lot of Chicano activists here in the States started celebrating it, pushing for local celebrations. And so that's right, Day of the Dead, right? Well, what started happening was people were back transliterating Day of the Dead into Spanish. And so that's where you get the los from, right? Dia de los Muertos, Day of the Dead, right? So Dia de los Muertos, while not incorrect, is a backwards translation of the English from the Spanish into Spanish, whereas Dia de Muertos is the original Spanish. So you'll see that around happening now. A lot of modern groups, a lot of just people now are starting to use Dia de Muertos. You're starting to see Dia de los Muertos dissipate. Even in Coco, you'll notice in the opening lines, they's like, oh yeah, Dia de los Muertos. And then, but any of the banners you see and all this stuff in the movie, they actually say Dia de Muertos, just to sing without the los. So just something a little fun there for terminology. If you're joining in late, again, do you hear me say the word Mexica? I'm referring to the Aztecs. The Aztecs is the colonized name. Another way to refer to the Mexica is the Nahua peoples. That would encompass a lot more than just the Mexica. The Mexica are a particular ethnic tribe of the Nahua-speaking people. So the Nahua would kind of encompass them and their other alliances and the Triple Alliance. That would become what we would call the Aztec Empire. And I mean, people all the way up to like the Pueblo natives here in the States, it's an imaginary border, right? So with that, that's just some of the terminology out of the way. So to recap again from last week, the ancient origins of Dia de Muertos can go back right to our indigenous people. This is not a Catholic holiday. This is not European. But I mean, obviously it has aspects of it, but the indigenous parts can be traced back to 3 different festivals. The first one was called Misal Iwen. Words. Now what? Not always the easiest. Misal Iwen Ontli, which essentially means the Feast of the Revered Deceased, which ran from an our Gregorian calendar, the 12th of July to the 31st of the same month. Melissa, is Dia de Muertos like day dead? No. So the de in there, so de, I'm typing it out, equals of the. Whereas, so Dia de Muertos, so Day of the Dead would be a translation of Dia de Muertos, whereas Dia de los Muertos would be a transliteration, not a translation, a transliteration of Day of the Dead, right? So hopefully that makes sense there. Sorry, I couldn't hear for a sec. The feast of the what deceased? The feast of the revered deceased. The feast to the revered deceased. But bam. I mean, I guess technically, that's pretty much the one slide I have for this. Because again, this is mostly recap. A lot of this that's on here, that we're talking about some of the indigenous stuff. Once the video for part 1 will be up, you'll be able to reference that if you missed that. I'm just gonna mute a couple of folks. All right. Bam. All right. So we're good to go again. But yeah, feast. Oh yeah, Joe Quetzal, what's up? I also go by Quetzal. Part 1, yeah, part 1 will be available soon, promise. But a little recap. So the feast to the revered deceased ran from the 12th of July to the 31st of July, and was held in celebration of children who had died, and was mostly held in honor of the Lady of the Dead, Mixteca Suat, Mixteca Suwat is her name. She would, if you're familiar with La Santa Muerte, she would go on to transform into La Santa Muerte. Both of these holidays that two of the three holidays that the ancient Dia de Muertos is that the modern day Dia de Muertos is based off of were both in honor of the Lady of the Dead, Miteca Suwat, but they still also kind of split, whereas the first one was more predominantly her, and the second one, Oe Mis Iwitli, uh, would be specifically for the Lord of the Dead, right? But she ruled over both. So if you kind of subcategorize it, uh, the second one, We Mis Iwitli, which translates to the feast to the greatly revered deceased, right? If you know anything about like Chicano or Mexican slang, like, in that way, right? Like, way. Um, it ran from August 1st to August 20th, and was held in celebration of adults who died, and was more in honor, like I said, of the Lord of the Dead. If you are familiar with Dia de Muertos in general, you can start already seeing these two celebrations, what is sometimes referred to as the mini feast of the deceased, the mini feast, the miniature feast of the dead is for children, and then the greater feast is for adults. A festival that ran alongside the feast of the greatly revered deceased. So again, that second one would be Tlacochimaco, or the bestowal of flowers. It was held in honor of Huitzilopochtli. Huitzilopochtli was the main deity that the Mexica honored. Everyone knows about Quetzalcoatl, right? Quetzalcoatl or Cuculacán in the Maya pantheon. But Huitzilopochtli was actually their main deity, and his name translates to hummingbird on the left. Now, think of what beats very, very fast, like a hummingbird, on your left side. Right, so it's a reference to the heart there. Tlacochimaco was celebrated between August 8th and August 27th, and involved bringing flowers into the home and building large structures from these flowers all over the cities, temples, and of course, individual homes in shapes of various animals, gods, and spirits. Um, Once again, if you know anything about the modern Dia de Muertos, you're already seeing some correlations here, right? Common customs of Mexica families and now what families in general at the time during these feasts of the dead would be to craft skulls out of amaranth grain. This is the precursor to sugar skulls. So the art of making sugar skulls came with Italian monks, right? We're going to talk a little bit about that later. But prior to colonization, the Nahua people would use amaranth grain and amaranth flour for a lot of their sacred cooking and in their ritual meals, right? Amaranth was sacred to the Nahua peoples, to the indigenous people, and still is to their ancestors who are still here today. Do not be mistaken. The Mexica and the Maya are still here. They did not go anywhere. They are not long ago dead, peoples. They are still here and thriving. But what happened was, so what they would do is they would take amaranth grain and mix it with agave nectar to craft skulls and other iconography of their gods and spirits. And then these would be baked at times. Sometimes they were just as they were taken raw like that. But because it was so sacred and integral to their spirituality, when the European colonizers came in and were attempting to convert the indigenous peoples, they made it illegal for indigenous people in Mexico and Central America to consume amaranth grain. They would do the same thing to quinoa with the Incas, because again, quinoa was sacred to the Incas. Now we can find that at Whole Foods, priced completely out of most of our budgets. So the colonization continues, I guess, but we're finding ways to fight back. So other things they would do is they would offer money, cow, wax. So this could be candle wax or sap even. They would sacrifice birds and then give them as offerings. You would also find collections of fruits and seeds that would all be offered to the spirits. Um, there would be lots of dancing, and particularly eating of tamales de turkey. So turkey tamales. Uh, turkey is the turkey and deer were the two main meats that the indigenous people of Mexico and Central America would eat. Um, Christopher Columbus himself was the guy to bring over pigs, so pork is definitely not indigenous. Um, and cows are also not native to the Americas. So all of our carne asada and carnitas, lovely, amazing, delicious from the colonizers, though. So turkey tamales. You want to make some like legit indigenous tamales this year, especially with Navidad coming up. You turkey. That's going to be your way to go, or deer. That could also be good. That could go as well. Quail, I believe as well. If I'm recalling correctly, it's on my notes, but if quail's indigenous to the continent, I believe that is one of them. And then interesting thing, only elders were allowed to consume intoxicants. So unless you were, what they would consider an elder, you did not get to have any pulque. You did not get to have any of the other fun, mind trippy or make your body todo wango kind of stuff, right? This was reserved strictly for elders. So that these traditions would carry on in minor ways through colonization. Something, at least as far as for the Mayas. So the Mayas never had any sort of particular um, holiday for the dead, like or calendar holidays for the dead, like the Mexica did or the Nahua peoples did. The Maya would do things daily, right? They would bury the dead in the courtyards. They would make sure their dead were dug up and cleaned. Certain times they would dig up the skulls of a loved one who was buried in the courtyard and actually write their names across their skull. So again, another hint as to what would be to come. Um, and yeah, so uh, and like just general ancestor altars and such, but nothing like these feasts for the dead, such as the Mexica had. Um, and so via colonization is when all these different loose ends, or at least the Maya loose ends, as far as like non-specific stuff, would get intermingled with these feasts of the dead. Um, and then, of course, all leveled up with a heavy layer of Catholicism. So that brings us up to about colonial times. So during colonial times, the Spanish moved the Mexica holidays of the feasts to the revered deceased to align with All Saints Day, All Saints Eve, All Saints Day, and All Souls Day. Pretty much the same thing they did with Samhain to line it up with these same exact holidays as well, because if you know anything about Samhain and you've ever looked at Dia de Muertos for more than 5 minutes, you can see like correlations already, right? Like it's not that big of a leap. Um, so the Spanish were like, let's just throw it all over here. 20 cents. Why were the elders only allowed? I'm not entirely sure why the elders were only allowed. I do know the thing is with a lot of these resources is that a lot of these documentation, especially on these spiritual holidays, were destroyed or altered by the Spanish during colonization. Um, and so some of the codices um, that we do still have do not we cannot trust them to be honest reflections of the actual beliefs of the person writing them, or the people writing them, because they were oftentimes written with a Spanish monk or priest or somebody pretty much over their shoulder, like, no, 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 you're not going to include that, no, 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 actually we're going to change that, we're going to leave that out, and we're going to put this in. So there's lots of bits and pieces missing. Some make more sense than others. but this is just one of the ones that I haven't been able to find. Chances are it is out there. And if I were, I imagine if somebody's able to study under a curandero, which is a Latine shaman of sorts, um, of sorts, um, and be able to actually travel to these sites, I bet they could get better answers from the people themselves. But as a Chicane researcher into a lot of this, who doesn't have that connection to the homeland in that particular personal way just yet, working on it. I can't give an exact answer there yet, but one day I'll have that for you. Long tangents aside, right? So they moved these feasts of the revered deceased to line up with the already existing Catholic Saints Eve, Saints Day, and Souls Day. This is where the modern Dia de Muertos being celebrated from November 1st and 2nd come in. Some traditions will start as early as October 27th. Some start on the 28th, some start on the 31st. It really just depends because, again, a lot of these people that we're looking at, the Nawa peoples, were not a monolith. And even though the Mexica were definitely conquerors in their own right, and definitely had the indigenous people that they ruled over try to conform to their standards, it didn't always work. Clearly, because when the Spanish tried it, still didn't really work. So you'll find variation. If you see somebody, if you ever see any post people talking about Dia de Muertos starting on the 28th, but then you look it up, like Dia de Muertos dates, and it says November 1st, they're not wrong. It's just different indigenous traditions, right? But for the most part, the national holiday, and as far as the national holiday is concerned, it is November 1st and 2nd. November 1st is known as Dia de los Inocentes, or Dia de los Angelitos, Day of the Innocents, or Day of the Little Angels. This would be celebrated for children who have passed away. And then November 2nd is Dia de Muertos proper, or as it's often sometimes referred to as Dia de los Difuntos, Dia de los Difuntos, which also does translate to Day of the Dead. Difuntos meaning dead. So again, if we were paying attention earlier, as far as the feast to the revered deceased coming first, right, and the Gregorian July being for children, and then feast of the greatly revered deceased coming in August 2nd, right, for the adults. You could see that reflected, or you can see that reflected here still to the modern day. Dia de los Inocentes for the children, and Dia de Muertos, Dia de los Difuntos, for the adults who passed away, right? And during colonization is when the Italian monks started using sugar, teaching the indigenous people for sugar. Sounds similar to that of Catholic teachings. Wonder where did they mix or change? So it was during colonization when the Spanish actively moved these larger holidays to align with All Saints Day and All Souls Day. But as far as where the Mexica got this order from, it's kind of, as far as I know, lost to history. That's just kind of how they did it. And again, they picked up these traditions from the Olmecs and the Toltecs. So those may have, that pattern may have even started before the Mexica were bopping around themselves. But yeah. So now to what we have here on the slide. Hanal Bishan. Hanal Bishan translates to food of the souls, food of souls, and runs from the night of October 31st, which is when it's believed that children would come around The souls of children would come around to the night of November 1st for the adults, who would come around, and then the evening of November 2nd is when the saints would come around. So Hanal Pishan comes, which is essentially the Maya version of Dia de Muertos, or the Maya understanding of Dia de Muertos, or their variation of it, would only pop around during colonial times. Because again, the Spaniards are trying to just lump all these incredibly different indigenous people into one monolith, right? It's why I think we have such difficulties with just the Latino community. We call ourselves Latino, Latinx, Latine, Hispanic, right? Like, we're not one giant monolith. We're a lot of different individual peoples. But so Hanal Bishan began in colonial times and is still celebrated to this day. You'll see it often referred to, like I said, Hanal Bishan, Mayan Day of the Dead, Maya Dia de Muertos. I wouldn't say it's necessarily wrong, but I don't necessarily want to say it's correct either. Because if you have seen ofrendas for Dia de Muertos, you can see a color palette change here. And again, with the name meaning food of souls, food of the souls, you hear both. The emphasis on food on these ofrendas, right? On these altars, there is a lot of food on here. And so food plays a big, big role in Hanal Pishan, in a similar way that food plays a role in Dia de Muertos, but to a much grander scale, right? So again, I wouldn't necessarily call it correct to say it is, Mayan Day of the Dead, but I wouldn't say it's exactly correct either. So your mileage may vary. Some of the beliefs that popped around during colonial era, Hanal Pishan, was if somebody died during these 3 days, their body had to be cleansed before any sort of death practices or death rites could be bestowed. It was considered bad luck to die during Hanal Pishan, or it is considered bad luck. Once the body is cleansed, though, this is something that I find utterly fascinating and so incredibly beautiful, right? The water that was used to clean the body of the deceased person was collected. None of it was spared. None of it was thrown out. It was collected and used to make food for the villagers, for the people in the community, right? So I know this can seem obtuse or even gross to most Westerners, like, this water was just used to bathe the dead, to clean the dead body. How are we going to put this in our food? That sounds unsanitary. Well, when you cook with it, right, you cook it, you heat up the water, it, right, burns away all the bacteria. That is, cooking 101. But the reason they did this is they believed that by the water that was cleansed, that was used to cleanse the body, would carry the sins of the person, right? Their sins would be literally and physically washed away via that water. That water then being spread put into the food and then spread into the community would take the sins of the one individual person and spread them amongst the villagers, thus lessening the deceased's burden. More or less, the community took in the sins, the negative things the negative energy that was left behind by the dead, and would collectively ingest, process, and work through these sins, right? So that the person themselves didn't have to do it all alone. It was a communal aspect. It was literally, they were all in this together, essentially, right? They wanted this person to be able to make it into heaven, and that person couldn't do it if they died in sin. So thus the community who's still alive, who could actually, right, rid themselves of it, would do that together. And I just think that is absolutely wonderful. So that is definitely one of those things we want to make sure we check our Western bias at the door with. Because as I've taught this class for 6 years now, and at least when I can see y'all's faces, I generally get some funny, gross meat faces. So, um, I love y'all's responses so far. That is definitely good group here. I like it's like Alexandra knows what she's doing with this academy, right? um, so and I'll be Sean during colonial times. Just gonna drink some water. So still to this day, a tradition that began during colonial times. Kids have will have a red and black string tied to their wrists to protect them from malicious spirits, because it's a time when all spirits can come back, not just the ancestors. And animals are, so in these cases, particularly dogs, but all animals are restrained, so they're tied down, right? They're leashed down to not so as to not disturb the visiting souls, right? Last thing, imagine you're coming back as an ancestor. You just had a long trip from the afterlife, and the last thing you want is to walk up to your grandkids' home, and then they're just like, is a bog darking, a dog barking at you, and that just sounds like an anxious process. I'm good off of that, so I get it. I get the desire for this, right? So modern celebrations of how Hanal Bishan is still celebrated. So I'm going to dip back. Let me see here. Yeah, so modern. So I know we started with the Mexica and the Nahuas, and we dipped into the Mayas. Um, so we're gonna stay here with the Mayas, moving into modern day, and then we're gonna jump back to the descendants of the Mexica, which can also be understood as being just the state of Mexico in general. Um, if There's a whole story there. Whether you agree with that or not, that's the thing. But yeah, so we're just gonna keep going with the Mayas right now, and then we'll jump back to modern, to Dia de Muertos specifically. So more Hanan Pijan, yay! Um, so the altars that are constructed for Hanal Pishan are very, very special. See, they're constructed from a type of wood from a tree called the Sebia tree. That's Ceiba, otherwise known as Yakshe, the world tree. If you're looking for Sebia tree like that, it's mundane name. Um, right. So the Yakshe, their world tree, was they believed in the real world. They do believe in the real world, that the Sebia tree is representative of that, and and act as doorways. So, being that this is the world tree, right? This is the portal to the ancestors. They every year make new and fresh altars for Hanal Pishan. We're talking down there. You make that table from the Sebia wood. You use it for 1 year for Hanal Bishan for one celebration. Next year, you got to make a whole brand new one. We're not reusing stuff, right? This is a very, very special and sacred tree, right? They also use Sebia wood to make other altar instruments and things, but the Sebia tree itself is very, very tall, right? It is specifically super tall and super straight. It doesn't grow very crooked, right? In the roots live bats, which are symbolic of the underworld. It feels like a no-brainer there. Um, 2 seconds, y'all. Um, Sorry about that. Um, The branches up high reach out in the four cardinal directions. Like if you see I meant to grab a physical picture, but I ended up going for two depictions instead. My apologies. But if you see like the actual sebia trees, right? Their branches literally grow out into the four cardinal directions, um, which are symbolic of the celestial realm, which we talked about last time. The trees symbolized and allowed for passage between the realms and was signified by a cross. So here's something interesting about Hanal Pishan, just through the colonization process in general, right? Um, let's see, what's this picture you got here? That's pretty good. I'll take a look at that later more. But thank you for posting that. But the Mayas were already using crosses as symbols for their world tree, their access, from their world into the afterlife, right, to the spirit realms. So when colonizers came on in, or it was like, oh man, you're using the same symbol as we are. That's all right. So it wasn't that. Um, so it's one of the things when you'll see uh altars for Hanal Pishan, right? Um, yeah, there might be a cross because yes, they're possibly Catholic, but the Maya people have been using crosses for their death rites for centuries, long before the colonizers ever came. So tables would be covered with specially woven and embroidered tablecloths. Dishes are crafted out of clay or calabash wood as well. They construct waxed candles per individual person who has died. So one candle per soul, right? So however many people you're honoring, that's how many wax candles you're going to make. As similar to Dia de Muertos altars and ofrendas, there definitely needs to be some salt and water, which represent life and death, respectively, and there is said to provide protection against the quote bad winds. According to Hanal Pishan tradition, the altars need to be tiered. How you see three here on the left hand side with the white tablecloth, and then the one with the leaves being used as a cloth. Um, you'll see two, and then you'll see in the very bottom corner a third one right there as well. So three is a very popular tiered option, and we'll go into why. 2 seconds. All right, thank you guys. Um, some altars use bright colors for kids and joyfulness, represent joyfulness. Some use white and or gray for adults, symbolizing respect for elders. Now, the one thing with Hanan Bishan that if it's a whole thing about food, right? Um, the next thing importance for Hanal Bishan would be that everything is freaking clean. We're not just talking like, right, or, grabbing, your Swiffer and the dustpan and just bang some Febreze on the couch. No, 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 no. We're talking deep clean and doing it early, right? Like people's chore, like I mean, this is the time of year, like when you think of like spring cleaning, right? When you're throwing out old things, when you're moving bookcases and couches to get behind things, like that's the kind of cleaning we're talking about for Anad Bishan, right? Like everything needs to be spotless. Your chores need to be done early because it was considered rude to have your ancestors return to a dirty home because it is thought that if they return to a dirty home, they're gonna be like my peoples, my nietos, my children. I can't it isn't done. I need a help. I need to jump in. I can't, I came to visit, but it looks like we're going to be working the whole time. The souls are essentially thought to that they're gonna jump in and help, and that is just rude. You don't invite your mama over to have her do your chores for you. Like that's just not how it's done, right? This is not what we're doing here. Yes, thank you, Neves. Neves, salt and water. And again, once the house is clean and the food is cooked, there is food everywhere. As you saw on those altars in the previous slide, there's food on every single spot on these altars, on these ofrendas. Um, some traditional foods that are made for Hanal Pishan would be muchipollo, which is what this on the left side here is. So this is a type of tamal that is way bigger than what we consider, tamales to normally be. Fun fact on there if you weren't with us last time. The plural is tamales, right? The singular is not tamale. The singular is tamal. So just fun fact on that one. I I don't know. Certain things make my brain go meh. Um, right. So it's one giant tamal is what the muchipollo is. It is masa, so right, corn flour essentially, and chicken wrapped in banana leaves and cooked in an underground pit. Some for up to 10 days. Like these things are savory, right? You would take there's a bunch of other foods that are specific to Anal Pishan, but we just don't have time for all of those. This is just Michipuyo is just if you haven't ever had a chance, we're it is the season right now. Find it. It's delicious. Mm. Um, this what is pictured over here on the right with this pink beverage here is called colonche, which is an alcoholic beverage made from the tuna, which is Spanish for prickly pear. The prickly pear is that pink fruit that's on top of a cactus, right? So that's colonche. I've never tried it myself, but I intend on finding it. Um, checking the chat. Sweet. Um, Other dishes that were commonly made, that are commonly made, are turkey dishes. Because again, like I mentioned, turkey is one of the native meats that to this continent that people eat. Uh, you would you are easily to find atole on a Hanal Pishan altar. Atole is, if you're not familiar, similar to champurrado. Both of these are pretty much indigenous hot chocolate, but with masa mixed in, so they're thick. I have a picture of some champurrado later, so you'll see. You get an idea. Definitely, these you can find. Go to a Mexican church on a Sunday during Christmas season. You will find that. You will find some champurrado atole, and it is good. Another common beverage during this time would be pulque. So pulque is the ancestor to tequila and mezcal. It's actually made from the heart of the agave rather than the leaves of the agave plant. Um, you could still find pulque huts around Mexico to this day. It is said when you drink, so pulque is this very like viscous white beverage, and it's said that when you drink pulque, um, your body you lose all motor functions. You lose your ability for your motor functions, but your mind is crystal clear. Like you can still think straight, but your body's all loosey goosey, right? So all of these foods, all these beverages, we placed on plates, or so specific plates or specific vases or cups and placed on the altar and placed on altars um, for specific loved ones. Um, a common practice too was to leave out an extra plate for lonely spirits, spirits who no longer have homes to return to, spirits who died and were unknown and forgotten. So it is very common you'll see for them to leave out an extra plate for those who just have nowhere else to go. Yeah, yeah, tuna's not fish. Yep. And yes, pulque. He spelled exactly like that. Yep. So we kind of talked a little bit about Hanal Pishan, but this is specifically a Dia de Muertos class. So I wanted to just talk a little bit about Hanal Pishan because it doesn't deserve to be ignored, especially because its roots really did also influence what would become modern Dia de Muertos. So it wasn't until the early 2000s when Mexico made it an official national holiday. I want to say it was like '01 or '02 or something like that. It was it was not that long ago, really. It was like 20 some odd years ago. Um, like I mentioned before, it was traditionally a Southern Mexican holiday. So when it became a national holiday, is when so things are finally starting to take off now, right? In 2008, it was recognized by the UN as a essentially a national treasure. I don't remember the exact specific thing, but it's one of the awards that the one of the statuses that the UN offers for culturally relevant and culturally important things. Dia de Muertos was the first non-physical, tangible thing given this recognition. Right? You can't touch Dia de Muertos. Isn't it something you can hold and construct? Right? It is an idea. It is a concept. It is a tradition. Um, and so this was a very, very important and big moment for Mexico and for Dia de Muertos as well. Um, Dia de Muertos, still to this day, is often symbolized by La Calavera Catrina. You'll find Catrina costume contests or themed events all throughout October and early November. Um, so the Catrina is, I mean, she's like one of the most iconic images from Mexican art in general. La Calavera Catrina translates to the dapper skeleton or the elegant lady. She was created by Jose Guadalupe Posada sometime between 1910 and 1913. We don't know exactly when he created her. He doesn't really remember. He's just like, sometime at this point, these are my papers. Don't have dates. Originally, she was only drawn shoulders up, but it was in 1947, Diego Rivera, the husband of Frida Kahlo, would paint her full bodied for the first time in his painting here shown here, Dream of a Sunday Afternoon along Central Alameda. So this is a giant mural, right? Um, and this is again the first time we see the Catrina in full body. So if you've seen her with her iconic, right, like feathered serpent scarf and all that, that was Rivera's addition. Because again, traditionally Posada only had her shoulders up. It was the hat, and it was the big old French hat with the skeletal face, right? Um, just noticing we got a couple people unmuted here, so we're just gonna go in on there real quick, make sure we're all good to go. Hmm. Sorry about the hoarse voice. I started a new job this week, so last week doing a lot more talking than I'm used to. Um, right. So the whole mural tells a story from left to right. I'm always trying to remember how y'all are singing. I think you're probably singing the same way I am. Um, right on the left hand side, let's see here. my apologies. It's yeah, so the left hand side. So on the left hand side, you have colonization pretty much occurring, right? Um, and then it slowly drifts into, so all the people are actual people from history, right? There's some Mexican presidents in there, revolutionaries. Rivera himself is at the very bottom, is very front, right next to La Catrina, with Carlo right behind him. Um, so it goes from colonization into the modern era. This again parade of um, of Mexicans down Central Alameda, um, and the center is supposed to be almost like culturally representative of the time. Whereas as you move to the right, you get highlights of independence movements, revolutions, freedom fighters, and pretty much the hopes and dreams for Mexico to come, right? Um, and so the whole painting tells a story, and right, pretty much dead center, you have La Catrina there for the first time in full body. Now, what's funny is um, some people have likened this to a Dia de Muertos parade simply because of La Catrina being in the center. But it wasn't until a certain James Bond movie was released that Mexico City ever got a um, a Dia de Muertos parade. So, right, James Bond, Dia de Muertos, what's going on here, right? Isn't he like some British spy? Yeah, yes, that was Diego. Was Diego that small compared to Frida? No, he wasn't. He was definitely not that small, but with the way they treated each other, I wouldn't be surprised if we felt that way. Um, man, those folks are they are the epitome of non-ethical non-monogamy. Uh, they openly cheated on each other. They both knew they were cheating on each other. They were, having affairs with each other's friends and yelling at each other over it, and then same time were engrossed with each other. Yeah, yeah, they're a whole they're a telenovela in and of themselves, right? So 2015, Spectre, right? Spectre, that James Bond film with the new blonde-haired, blue-eyed James Bond. I'm a '90s kid. Pierce Brosnan left. I didn't pay attention anymore. But so 2015 Spectre comes out, or Spectre came out right before that when they were filming it. They were literally the film. One of the consultants for the film called is La Catrina the one with skull dressed? Yes, that is La Catrina then. Um, so one of the consultants for the films pretty much calls the one of the cultural center for Mexico City and is like, "Oh hey, when is y'all's Day of the Dead parade happening? We want to film a scene for the new James Bond movie while that's happening." And Mexico City's response was, "We don't have a Day of the Dead parade. We never have." And they're just like, "Oh, okay. Well, do you mind if we get some permits so we can just make a parade so to fit for the film?" And then in Mexico City's like, "Sure, whatever." you know, put our buildings in more movies. That kind of works. Upon release of that, when Spectre is released, and Dia de Muertos is approaching, tourists were calling Mexico City, "Hey, when's your parade? When does it start? Where is it going to begin?" Mexico City's like, a parade? We don't have. Oh, from the movie. From the movie. Yeah, we have a parade. That's gonna be on this day, and they literally came up with one because of the movie. I kid you not, and to this day, some odd years later, 8 years later, 7, 8 years later, they've been having one. I obviously during COVID, right? They did not. But the the parade has been growing, has been attracting attention, has been getting just more and more gnarly. Um, but yeah, a James Bond movie is the reason Mexico City, Tenochtitlan, freaking the center of Mexica Empire, where all this stuff ties back to, has its first Dia de Muertos parade, or at least Dia de Muertos proper. That is not to say that other parades weren't happening. Just LDF, Mexico City, um, Distrito Federal, didn't have a parade proper. Didn't have a parade. Yeah, yeah. Wow. I know. I didn't believe when I first read that. I was like, what the heck? um, let's see here. So we have a little bit of recap of modern Dia de Muertos, right? With La Catrina, James Bond, the UN. But what does Dia de Muertos look to the individual? How does it look for an individual person? So we're going to get into that now. Do note that there's going to be some Catholic aspects here, which I feel like should have been obvious, but just a heads up. But again, a lot of this is rooted in indigenous traditions. So there's that too. And that's what I generally tend to highlight myself anyways. So yeah, let's get in there. So ever since the release of Coco, which again, amazing, beautiful, wonderful, watch it. Seriously. I know Disney's like the evil empire or something, but oh gosh. Um Photos are a huge thing for an ofrenda, right? An ofrenda literally just means offering, and has become a way to refer to the altar, for Dia de Muertos altar or an ancestor altar in general, but specifically for Dia de Muertos. So, as you can see from this ofrenda from Coco, there's photos on every tier. Every loved one who has passed has a photograph. And photos are a big part. And while Coco, they like for the movie and for the plot point has like, the grand matriarch on the top, with Mama Coco as like, a little kid there. Um, you don't necessarily need to require your photos in a sort of hierarchical order like that. I have a tendency to sometimes do that just because, with my grandfather's photos, just because he was so important to me, particularly growing up, and just the size of the photo too, so almost aesthetically. But it's the order is not necessarily required. So do note that. Now, other things you'll see on an ofrenda, kind of similar to what you saw in Coco, is items of loved ones. So either theirs or symbolic, right? It could have been stuff that was literally physically theirs, or things that represent them or things that they liked, right? Like in Coco, you have the different shoes that each ancestor was really good at making there. It's never really, the movie never really tells us if those were shoes they actively made or if those were just the style. So so in this photo here, we see like, a top and a toy car and a guitar as well. So again, these are items a loved one would have enjoyed, did enjoy, or is symbolic of them. So one of the things I like to put on my ofrenda, for my tia Hela, is a is something like with wolves on it. I used to have this wolf statue that was actually hers. She loved wolves. I'm no longer in possession of that, so now I just will try to find something with wolves on it, whether it be like sometimes I think this year I'm just gonna go to the thrift store because I moved and I don't have it right now, have anything right now. But yeah, So it could be something that's even just symbolic of them. It doesn't necessarily need to be a physical thing of theirs. So if you don't have that, that's not required, right? And of course, food, because food. It's holidays, food. Um, Common dishes and common things left for on ofrendas are local fruits like oranges or the Mexican hawthorn apples, a very common fruit put onto ofrendas. Mole, which is this chicken dish here. Mole is a chocolate peanut butter sauce with chocolate peanut butter chile sauce. If you've never had it, do yourself a favor. Go get some. Um, I'm sorry, can we go back to the mural for a sec? My apologies, honey son. I did not see this. Um, we will I can we can go back to the mural in a moment. Does it matter the color of the votives? Also, I think the movie is beautiful, so deeply moving. The candles can matter depending the calendar colors. I'm going to talk about candles in a moment. Still not seen Coco, but I get it from a Catholic upbringing. Go see it. It's awesome. Okay, and thanks. You're good, sweet. Appreciate it. Sorry about that. Uh, um, damn. Yeah, mole is delicious. Um, so yeah, it's commonly served with a kind of has the sesame seeds in there. It's a spicy chile peanut butter chocolate sauce. It's delicious, but it's not as sweet as one would expect. A lot of like when you get into like chocolate, like indigenous done chocolate, it's not as sweet. It's definitely a lot more bitter. The Europeans are the ones that like their sweet chocolate. Um, I say that as somebody who loves just a standard Hershey's bar. um, Beans are another very common thing. My grandfather, when it comes to Dia De Muertos, I'll talk about my grandfather all the time. My papi Chuy, um, Jesus Garcia was his name. He uh, he would not eat a meal unless it had beans with it. Like, I mean, I legit like beans with his eggs, beans with his meat, beans with he never ate salads or anything called salads and the rabbit's food. Um, but I mean, like I think my grandma served us up spaghetti once, and he still wanted a bowl of beans. Like he needed it, right? Um, and so it's a very common thing. And so for me, I always got some beans on there for him too. Tamales are another very common thing that you'll see. Tamales are like one of the staple indigenous cuisines. Um, so you'll see those a lot. This is a good picture of champurrado. So you'll see champurrado or atole. You can see where the cinnamon stick is in, just how it's almost viscous around the edge of the cinnamon stick there, right? I was trying to find a picture that could show just how thick it actually is. Like it is somewhere in the middle between like a like a standard hot chocolate liquid and like a porridge. It's like if you made your oatmeal a little too runny, right? It's kind of like that, to be honest. It's I'm getting hungry. um to make traditional atole or traditional champurrado is a lot of work. Uh Easiest way, I know it's instant packets, but like so it's all it feels almost like hearsay or not hearsay. It feels maybe that's the word. I'm spacing right now. It almost feels heretical, but the little packages of atole, you can find chocolate, which is would be technically a champurrado, right? Um, and other flavors as well. Um, and you just pour the packet into a boiling pot of like milk and water. Honestly, it works. They're not as good, obviously, clearly, but they're pretty good. Um, yeah, blasphemous works too. um, you would also put the deceased favorite food. So, like I talked about the beans with mine. So, say you're building an ofrenda for your tío, right? And your tío did not like mole, was not a big into beans, but loved croissants, right? Just let's say he just loved croissants. Cool, throw a croissant on there. Like, put whatever your loved ones liked. That is most important because this ofrenda, this holiday is to reconnect with them. We're not going to put something that they didn't like. That's rude. We talked about we ain't being rude to our family, right? So put what they like. So like every year I buy a bottle of this. It's El Presidente brandy, which is my grandfather's favorite alcohol. I'm a tequila person personally, but he liked brandy. So that's what I get every year. It's the one time of year I drink brandy, and I get it just for him. So definitely you want to get what your ancestors liked. Another very common thing you see is pan de muerto, bread of the dead. So like here on the left, you have what is like the most common one, the circular one with like these like bones kind of going to the center with this like there's it's almost like it almost looks like an elbow or a knee, right? It's kind of what it's meant to actually look like. It's your joints, right? That's the word I'm looking for. So that is the most common type of pan de muerto you'll find. Um, but you'll see other types too. So these are other examples. Um, and they mostly just vary regionally. But again, they're all symbolic, meant to represent the dead, our loved ones, and the fact that this is part of our death rites, right? All right. So moving on from food, at least for the time being, probably. Another thing you'll find on a lot of ofrendas is flowers. Cempasúchil, otherwise known as Flor de Muertos, otherwise known as Mexican marigolds, are perhaps the most iconic and most common flower for Dia de Muertos. Like if you saw Coco and you're like, oh, do they really put like the flower petals like through the streets and on the ground? Yes, yes, we do. We're extra. Have you seen our telenovela? We are extra. We're an extra people. We always do the most. So up in the center, I have right just a close up of what the flower actually looks like itself. I wanted an example again of that making a walkway of it. And then again, like how we're talking with that festival for Tlaloc and for Hanal Pichon as well, still making arches with flowers, right? Still making decorative structures with these flowers. So other flowers you'll see common around Dia de Muertos is what it's called coxcomb, or which is in English it's in the celosia. It's a celosia flower, celosia plant, which is in the amaranth family. So again, finding ways to continue our indigenous traditions and pagan beliefs under the guise of Catholicism. You'll see roses a lot as well, especially around on ofrendas for people who worked with La Virgen de Guadalupe, the Virgin Mary, a lot. You'll see lots of roses, and just you'll see lots of flowers in general. But Cempasúchil is like the most iconic and the most well known, and perhaps my personal favorite. So it's said that the reason why Cempasúchil is so iconic and why it's used in this sort of way back to pre-colonial times. It was said that the smell of the flower, the scent of the cempasúchil, attracts the dead. It actively attracts souls, spirits, dead ancestors, right? If you remember, like I said, we're talking about Ofrendas, graveyards, and Coco. I'm using Coco a lot for this. If you remember in that movie where they're like, they're putting out the flower petals, and they're like, no, 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 you got to put them down the road. You don't want you don't want the ancestors to get confused, do they? Because again, they're said to follow the scent. It's what that little line. It's such a small scene, easy to miss, but it's what that is actually referencing to. It's kind of telling you why Simbasuchi. Grandfather loved his marigolds. Oh yeah, they're one of my favorites too. Let's see. Is La Virgen de Guadalupe the same as Mother Mary? Yes and no, and we can hang around for a minute because I got 40 more minutes to touch on a couple more things. And y'all, if you know me, I will talk. So let's get through this. But because yeah, there's a whole story there. I think I'm gonna be planning a whole class just on La Virgen because she is. Oh. But so bam. Let's see, where are we? But yeah, Flower of the Dead literally calls your ancestors in. Pretty cool. Fun fact, that's why myrrh is burned in Catholic churches, because myrrh was used in necromancy and is said to attract the dead as well. So that's kind of fun. Candles, veladoras, right? So you generally, especially from a Catholic perspective, you want to put a saint candle for the saint that your ancestor venerated and worked with a lot. Um, so for like my tia Hela, she was a Saint Jude devotee, so I have a Saint Jude candle for her, right? I hope that one day when my ancestors have an ofrenda for me, they put a candle for La Santa Muerte, right? Like that's part of it. Colors can have an importance here. I'm gonna be talking more on colors for papel picado, that paper that's always everywhere. Um, curanderismo and brujeria have slightly different color magical systems that are both different from Western magic. Um, but it can generally be understood as like white for purity, um, yellow for happiness, those sorts of things. They're not as strict with the colors. At least the Catholics aren't. A lot of I can't tell you how many times my grandma would just go and it's like, oh, this one's pretty and smells good and is the saint I want. Like, right? Um, so yeah, you definitely want your saint candles. Um, if you are somebody who has a background or familiar with um, voodoo, santeria, uh, and you are honoring an ancestor that worked with a specific Loa or Orisha, you can even get one of the Saint candles that would align to that particular energy as well. So for the papel pecado, so papel pecado specifically translates to uh, sin paper, sinful paper, pierced paper, uh, right? Particularly pierced paper. The different colors do mean different things here. Purple is for mourning. White is for hope. Yellow is for purity. Orange honors our Mexica, our indigenous roots, and pink is for celebration. That's why you'll see purple, orange, and pink as some of the most common colors. Um, Blue will represent the sky. You'll see some people say yellow represents the sun. It just kind of depends, but almost always purple is mourning, orange is our indigeneity, and pink is celebration. You'll sometimes see pink referred to as the particular pink that you'll see in a lot of papel pecado, especially if it's like legit, is called Mexican rose. It's a particular pink that comes from Mexico that specifically celebrates just Mexican culture. So it's not. It's why if you ever look at like a lot of like Mexican paintings and artwork and such, vases that are painted and all that pottery and all that jazz, that pink is very unique. It's not your standard just pink that you find in Crayola. It's its own thing. It's called Mexican rose. Love these little side tidbits. Uh, thank you. I it's the best thing about teaching. I just get to info dump, right? And you guys like want to listen. It's awesome. Is La Santa Muerte the same as the Grim Reaper? No. If anything, she's closer to La Parca, which is the wife of the Grim Reaper, but she's indigenous, not European. Combined, she's a mestiza, if you will, right? She's part indigenous, part European, but no, she is more related to the Lady of the Dead that we talked about earlier, Mitekasiwat, and La Parca, the wife of the Grim Reaper. Yeah, you're right, Michael. You have a great day, great evening. Thank you so much. Uh, right, cool. So, papel picado, pretty cool stuff. Oh, Mexican rose. It's a pretty color. Other standard offerings. Um, so sugar skulls, right? That is probably one of the most iconic thing for Dia de Muertos outside of La Catrina, right? So sugar skulls, this is what they actually look like. Just so y'all know. Like we always see like all like the um sugar skull salt and pepper shakers at TJ Maxx and Ross around this time of year, right? um, or the little wall hanging decorations at Spirit and Target, which, hey, Target at least puts Dia de Muertos in its own little cart separate from the Halloween, but just in the same area. Respect. I actually dig that. They don't put it with their Halloween stuff. Um, but so this is what a sugar skulls actually look like. They're made from actual sugar. They're an actual candy. And again, you could see on the forehead, there's this little aluminum slip, so you can write the name of a loved one. You remember what we were talking about with Hanal Pishan prior to colonization, before Hanal Pishan, right? Write the names on the skulls of their loved ones buried in the courtyard. Still doing that. So each sugar skull would represent a soul, an individual who's deceased. Um, Other standards are copal. Very, I feel like most of us know what copal is. Frankincense and myrrh, because again, Catholic, right? Frankincense is also purifies. The interesting thing about frankincense is where it doesn't purify like sage does, in that it cleanses like everything. Frankincense specifically cleanses things that you do not want in your space. It's kind of why I think it's my particular headcanon as to why the Catholic Church uses the frankincense and myrrh combo, is that, or at least the Latin Catholic Church, I don't know about the others, um, right? Because it cleanses everything you don't want from the space and then invites dead spirits. I mean, what is the Catholic Mass about to do? They're about to invite the dead soul of Christ to, like, so we can eat his literal body, right? Doing necromancy in Catholic Mass. Heck yeah. Frankincense and myrrh. Two other things you do need on your ofrenda. There's no ofrenda without these two things. Is a little cup of water and a little cup of salt. You need the salt and water. The salt helps ground the spirits when they come. The water hydrates them. They've just had a long journey. Got to take care of them, right? Are you supposed to eat the food and sugar skulls afterwards or throw it out or something? You are definitely supposed to eat the food. You share you share your meals with your loved ones, right? You definitely want to share the food. Good question. I should have mentioned that. Side note, did I mention La Santa Muerte? You ever offer anything La Santa Muerte, don't ever consume it yourself. You give something to her, it's hers. Give something to your ancestors, we're sharing. Something to note there. But yeah, this is I just want to note where this image is from, this sugar skull image, just because I freaking oh no, not this one, never mind. Yeah. So sugar skulls, candles, you can just put standard candles, they don't need to be the saints ones. You need your water and your salt, and then your incense, right? And from there, everything else is kind of up into interpretation. I've seen people put tarot decks. I've seen people put, so you'll put toys a lot for like kids who have passed away. So their favorite toys, Hot Wheels, dolls, that kind of stuff. Books. I mean, I've gotten mini little fishing rods from my grandfather before because he was a fisher. He liked to fish. So yeah, everything else is up for interpretation, but those are kind of pretty much the standards of what you need. Do the candles have to stay lit for the set amount of time? Tradition says you light the candles on the evening of the 31st and you do not turn them off till the morning of the third. But fire safety, never leave a candle, never leave a lit candle unattended. So your mileage, yeah. So kind of take it with a grain of salt there. Do what you need to do. I personally do turn off my candles, just because I don't feel comfortable sleeping with lit candles on. Because I have cats. If you have cats, don't leave a lit candle unattended, especially in general. Don't. But if you have cats, just don't. Um, LED candles can work too. Absolutely. I mean, at least I use them. Some people might find that to be like, like we said earlier, blasphemous, sacrilegious, whatever. But I think they work. I think it's more about the intent half the time, particularly with the candles. Certain candles, I'll have like actual real candles, but if they're just the more decorative ones, you're still offering energy, you're still offering power, which is what a candle, right? Flame. But yeah. So Dia de Muertos is obviously a big, big time for family. That's the whole point, right? We're celebrating our family, coming back and kicking it, right? So, what are things we do with our families, particularly? We've built an ofrenda, that's for sure. We got everything set up. We've been cooking, that's for sure. But eating, like we talked about a second ago, is definitely a big part of it. Um, Prayers for loved ones who have passed away, prayers to particular saints that loved ones worked with is another big thing. Telling stories of loved ones. Um, so, like my particular group with the ritual that with the ritual that I wrote for us to do. There's a part in it where we actively are all sitting down and we're all sharing stories of our loved ones, right? I like to tell stories about my grandfather's fishing trips and or his pies or his garden. You talk about your loved ones, right? You tell them, keep their memories alive, especially for the younger crowd, right? Like my little brother was not did not get to know our grandfather, but I want to make sure he knows the stories too. So you definitely want to keep that. Something else that has popped up in recent years due to the influence from Halloween, being around the same time, is a form of trick or treating, um, where you hand sugar skulls out with friends and family, um, or little kids are known to run through Mexico City and just go up to strangers or knock on doors and ask for calaverita, little skull, little skull. And so asking for candy or essentially, yeah, like little sugar skulls for them to eat. So that has been a newer thing that has popped up within the last couple of years, due to again Halloween's influence bleeding into Dia de Muertos. Where should you place your ofrenda in your home? So you generally want your ofrenda to be somewhere communal, right? If you're in an apartment with roommates, and you don't really have a space that can just be your ofrenda, your bedroom could work. I like putting mine out in the living room, even though I do have roommates, and I invite my roommates, some who are not Latine, to join in and put some photos on the ofrenda. as well, just because it is such a big part of my tradition. Um, but it can really go anywhere. Some people will build ofrendas in their front yard and allow their community to add to it. Um, yeah, doesn't have to be any particular place. So, so public celebrations. We got our friend that built at home. We had the food on the altars. We spent time with our family and talked about our loved ones. What if we're going out? What do we do then? Right? Well, there's lots to do. There's the panteones, which are essentially cemetery visits, right? It's that is like one of the most famous ones you see, depicted especially in media like Coco or documentaries. Um, During these cemetery visits, you clean the graves, you decorate them with flowers, you leave similar things as you would on an ofrenda for the loved ones at their grave sites. So again, like toys for kids, tequila and mezcal for adults, and then favorite foods and such. Um, People are known to have full picnics when going back to the cemetery at night. So you generally do all the cleaning, right, and setting up during the day, and then you come back in the evening. You bring your food, you bring your pan de muerto, you bring your tamales, you bring your enchiladas de mole, and you have a time. You eat with the family, you hang out. There's oftentimes live music going on, dancing, um, and in certain places, so like in Oaxaca, um, people will stay the full night. They won't just go for a little, like they will stay the entire night there, right? So here on the left, we have a band playing with calavera makeup, with skull makeup. And then on the right over here, you could see just how intricate these decorations can really, really get, right? These tall candles, the cempasúchil draped over everything, the tombs and the graves being covered with these plants, with this grass. Like, and I mean, I think that's one of the big things you see here. These people are in cemeteries, like thinking about the dead. And you look at these photos, I mean, these people are smiling. These people are having a good old time. That's definitely something important about Dia de Muertos. This is not a somber holiday. While it is, it's sad and we miss our loved ones, we party. We have a good time. We celebrate them. Other things that are done are parades, or in Spanish we call them comparsadas, comparsas. Words I can word today, I swear. But these parades essentially mark the return of the dead. They have people in costume. Let's see. Can you make an ofrenda with the same purpose of calling your ancestors if you're not Latina? We're gonna talk on that. We're gonna talk on that. Yeah. Those candles are gnarly. Right. But yeah, people will be dressed in costumes. There'll be marching bands. They'll go through the city center, all sorts of stuff. So the parades have become a big, big part of Dia de Muertos. Other things that can be done are ceremonies. So there's like Aztec dancers or a danza azteca. We'll be dancing outside churches during other celebrations. At times, certain people will have give me 2 seconds. During certain times, people will have parades or masses or rituals even for La Santa Muerte. A lot of folks believe that November 2nd is La Santa Muerte's feast day. If you're familiar with Catholicism, feast days are a common thing. Right. So this is a picture of a bunch of cars driving through Veracruz with statues of La Santa Muerte. tied to their roofs, right? And then you'll see the cempasúchil, that pink flower, that's that celia, that's that amaranth related amaranth family flower that we were talking about earlier, right? Um, there'll be concerts going on, bands will play. One of my favorite Dia de Muertos concerts that I went to was for this band called Metal Achi. They're a all Latine mariachi group that does covers of rock songs, metal songs. God, that was so much fun. Um, they'll do like movie showings. So there's like a whole bunch of art films revolving on Dia de Muertos. Um, commonly today, you'll see showings of Coco or like here, Book of Life. This is another amazing one, super underrated. As far as like if you know in the mainstream consciousness, mainstream American consciousness for Coco. I remember when Coco was announced, people were like, "Oh, that's just gonna be, another Book of Life remake." Da da da. And then it came out, and then now everybody knows about Coco, but not Book of Life. I think it's hilarious. I think that's hilarious. Um, there'll be costume contests that'll happen. There's just a lot going on, right? There's stuff everywhere happening. Then there is one of my personal favorite bits about these public celebrations. Um, where do we make the distinction between colonization and indigenous teachings? When it comes to Dia de Muertos, it is hard. It is hard. We have syncretized our indigenous beliefs a lot to Catholicism and these Catholic customs that certain things will have double meanings um, and such. So it really is a little difficult to kind of just explain in a nutshell. But so things like like Sempasuchi, right, is indigenous, and there's indigenous belief behind it of it calling dead, whereas roses are not native to the Americas and are commonly used on ancestor altars and ofrendas because they represent the Virgen de Guadalupe, the Virgin Mary, right? Who again, if we're thinking about it from the Virgin Mary aspect, right? Um, that is also not indigenous to the Americas. And so it's all tied in together. I think that is something that is really exemplified with La Calavera Catrina by Posada, in that the whole commentary of the Catrina is you can dress, right? You can have these fancy European clothing, the fancy French hat, but at the end of the day, your vessels, your bones are still indigenous, are still native. And so it's um, we as a people now, I mean, think about it, Latinas, we didn't exist 600 years ago. We are literally colonized natives. We are a product of colonization. Our culture is a product of colonization. So trying to decolonize is a process, and one not easily wrapped up in such a short answer. So I hope that answer suffices. But as I was saying, one of my favorite things that I just really like are the tapates de harina. The tapates de harina are sand tapestries. Harina translates to flour. Think of like flour, like FL, like baking flour, right? Um, these are those like super iconic and colorful works of art that are laid down in front of these ofrendas. They're generally made from colored sand, rice, seeds, dried beans, and flowers. I love this one here on the left. Just this again depiction that you have the traditional indigenous skull there with the glyph, and then you have it all colored in like La Catrina, like Dia de Muertos there. It is just wonderful. And I thought this was a good sky view. So this gives you a good idea of how big they can get. Like, look how high this is a couple stories up. And look how clear you can see some of these details. Like these things are not small, right? So to do this is some tedious, dedicated work. Absolutely beautiful. Mm. Yeah, beautiful and temporal. Temporal. I love that. Very much so. Now, another fun thing that is takes place around Dia de Muertos are the Calavera Literaria, which essentially is the literary skulls. These are poems, satirical poems written about politicians, about ideas, concepts, people. Could be your neighbor that you are poking fun at. Could be somebody you actively despise, and you know what? You're going to publish it on the public newspaper. Um, like I said, we're extra. We're in extra peoples. These verses had their origin in the 19th century as mocking epitaphs. They were always done. They were done for people, generally for people who had died, or at least treating them like they died, right? And a way of expressing ideas or feelings that on other occasions might be difficult to express, right? Especially if you're trying to mock somebody who's dead, right? Everyone's like, "Oh no, don't say that." You know, have some respect for the dead. Well, here, maybe not so much. The first calaveras were published in 1879 in this newspaper from Guadalajara called El Socialista, the Socialist. Here I have two of Posada's calaveras. This one here is where the Calavera Catrina first makes her debut. So that is the original. So we've seen both original variations of her in this. All right. So bam. And so it is common for people to write little calaveras to poke fun at their loved ones who are here, who are gone. But it's just a common thing, right? And again, like I mentioned, a lot of them get political. Like when I was looking some up earlier, I found a calavera por Donald Trump, and that one is quite fun. If y'all want to stick around after, maybe we'll read it. So now, last bit. How can you celebrate Dia de Muertos? You're not Latina, right? So now that I have all this information, how can I, as someone who is not Latina, celebrate Dia de Muertos? Well, there's actually a lot you can do. Yeah, just sip of water real quick. So one way you can celebrate is to celebrate with friends, right? Like, I mean, first off, if you're a white person and you don't, and all your friends are white, and you don't have any non-white friends, and you live anywhere, really, that's not at least a particularly, homogenous ethnic group, like particular parts of Europe. Um, that should be step one: is meet people outside of your bubble, right? Um, but yeah, talk, hang out, talk to your Latina friends, and be like, hey, are you doing anything for Dia de Muertos? Do you do anything for Dia de Muertos? Would you like to? You know, oh, you're going to a celebration. Would you mind if I come? Would you like some company? I celebrating with friends is such a big thing, right? Because 90% of the time, your friends are going to want to share this aspect of their culture with you, right? Like people don't, not everybody, most people don't live in a bubble, right? And even the most hardened introvert, uh, once they have found the person or people they want to let in, they love to share, parts of themselves with it. And holidays, ancestors, history, these sort of things are those types of things that, we want to be able to share with people. At least we should be able to share these things with people, right? Um, and if your friend says no, I don't want company, or no, it's kind of, I'm going with my, my other Latina friends or whatever. Like, don't be pushy, right? Um, but like it's not bad to ask, and it's not bad, just don't invite yourself either. Um, other ways you could celebrate are with the community, right? So here, if you're local to Denver, I have 3 flyers, which I'll go into in just a moment. These are some festivals. These are just 3 festivals happening this weekend coming up before Dia de Muertos. And there was some last weekend. There's been some before. There's some this week. There's some the following weekend after Dia de Muertos. So there's a lot, right? So go into your local Latina community. Go into your local Mexican neighborhoods. Support brown businesses. Buy, if you're going to buy your pan de muerto, buy it from a panaderia, right? Or carniceria. Don't, just go to the bakery where some, white dude is just trying to bank off of somebody else's culture, right? Go support the actual people, right? I would say this should go for most things, right? Like if I'm going to, like, as a Mexican, Salvadorian, indigenous person, if I wanted a source on pre Adic Norse traditions, I'm not going to go talk to somebody from the Philippines or from France. I'm going to go find actual Norse and Scandinavian, and in this case, possibly Icelandic, sources, right? You need to go to the people, right? It's just kind of how this thing should work. So go into the community, support local, always support local when you can. Yeah, there might be some cute little, Dia de Muerto sugar skull cats at Target. Those are adorable, but really go into your local community, support local artists. There's pop-ups all the time that have these things happening and that sell this sort of artwork as well. Support brown artists. Really, it's not that's one of the biggest things you can happily do. Another way you can do it, another way you can celebrate Dia de Muertos without, culturally misappropriating. And I think that's the main thing one of the main differences I want to point there is there's a difference between appropriation and misappropriation, right? Appropriation in and of itself is not a negative thing, right? Like in the Western world, we've appropriated the Arabic number system. We're not hurting people by, we're not hurting, the Arabic people by using Arabic numbers, right? But somebody putting on a sombrero, a white person putting on a sombrero with a fake mustache and a poncho that they bought off of Amazon for Taco Tuesday. Yeah, no, that's kind of messed up, right? That is actively offensive. So these things, right? So that there's one misappropriating, taking something out of its context, and misusing it for a idea, concept, tradition in a way that is not supposed to be used, and just language borrowing words, cultures borrowing numerical systems, right? We're not hurting Greek people by using or we're not hurting Italian people by using the Roman numeral system, right? It's just, sorry, numbers are what my brain goes back to for this particular bit. But yeah, so making sure we're drawing that line between misappropriation, and one way you can do all of what we talked about today without misappropriating, especially if you're white, especially if you're Celtic, is celebrate Samhain. Dude, I am not kidding you. The difference between Samhain and Dia de Muertos is a color palette, different foods, and different kinds of music. Legit, there's not much more different than that. It is still ancestor altars with photos, foods that they loved, telling stories, playing their favorite music, drinking their favorite drink, maybe even going visit them at the cemetery. Samhain generally has a bit of a more somber attitude, but I think that is also a lot more of the anglicized, colonized version of Samhain, because again, the Irish were also pretty beat up. The culture pretty beat up by Rome and then by the Brits afterwards, right? Samhain is a great way to celebrate your ancestors and make an ancestor altar and do these sort of traditions, but just without stepping on the toes of brown people, right? And the best way to do this sort of thing is if you have a very mixed friend group, again, Dia de Muertos on some traditions starts on the 31st. Samhain is the 31st, right? Halloween, right? Have a party where you have, you and your Latina friends have your ofrenda, your white friends have a have an ancestor altar for Samhain. Talk about each other's cultures. Realize how much more we have in common than we do separately, than we do different, right? We are very, very similar peoples. We have a lot more in common than we really think. And celebrating Samhain and Dia de Muertos, not not mixed, but together and joined together, um, as comrades, as family, as a human race. I think is a really, really great idea and how we can celebrate each other's cultures, learn from each other, um, and celebrate each other without taking from somebody else. Now, like I mentioned, going into your local community. If you're here in Denver, this is a great way. This is a great way to do it. I'm going to turn off the recording, and then we'll do questions. And we'll turn off the recording. I'm going to get into some details of when these events are happening, and then we'll get into some questions. And if you're still curious about the Santa Muerte and then the Virgen Guadalupe stuff, we could talk about that too. And then if y'all want to hear that Donald Trump Calavera, we can do that as well. But thank you all really for letting me ramble with you and share a part of my culture with you, a part I really, really care deeply about. Thank you.